Inspiration for Peninsula Hot Springs came from a time in 1992 when I was living in Japan. I hopped in the pools of a hot spring town in Kusatsu, which was in the mountains of Japan. It was in the middle of winter, there was snow all around, and I had an epiphany when I jumped in these pools for the first time. And I said, why don't we have this in Australia? A couple of months later, I got hold of my brother.
And Charles and his wife took us to a couple of hot springs in the Japanese countryside. And then just before we left, he sprung it on me about, wouldn't it be a good idea to do a hot springs in Victoria?
Richard said he wanted to think about it, and he thought about it for a couple of weeks and then said, yep, let's do it.
My wife and I came down and wandered around 2 or 3 different sites down on the peninsula. I can remember standing on this site talking to Julia and talking about the advantages of this site over potential other ones. That we both thought there was a good feel on the block, particularly the shapes of it, even though there was no trees yet. There was a number of different spaces with the sand dunes and a lot of hills and hollows, and you could picture things sitting in that. Julia might say there was more an esoteric vibe or something, the right feel.
He was saying to me, what do you think about this land, Julia? And I thought, I'm feeling it, Richard. I'm feeling the water beneath us. Pretty much started from there.
The first step was to drill a bore and pump some water so we could actually show what we were talking about, rather than being in theory. And no one was going to fund the project unless we had that first, so we basically used all our money and resources to get the block of land and drill a hole. The first hole that we tried to do, he got down to full depth, and they showed that there was water there, but then the drilling rods got stuck, and we had to then wait another 1.5 years before we got a second driller to drill down.
We had no money really. We had some children and we were feeding them with whatever we could find. But we kept this passion and this idea about the hot springs, and I couldn't quite let go of it, but it was took a lot of soul searching throughout that 18 months before the hot water came. And obviously the day that the hot water came was like an amazing moment, because we felt finally there's some reality to this crazy dream that we'd been holding on to for such a long period of time.
I think we ended up on Channel 9 News saying these brothers have discovered hot water. It was a bit like the Beverly Hillbillies sort of stumbled across hot water down the peninsula was the take they took. We actually went and saw someone from the state government who was the planning minister at the time. His advice was to not make it sound too big and too ambitious, not make it sound like our family's middle name, which is Disney, as he suggested, to make it look more like it's just a bathtub in a paddock.
And that was in an expectation that it was all going to happen within maybe 1 year, maybe 2. Little did we know it was going to take 8 years. Richard found a magazine which was of the Uluru Culture Centre, and we saw this building which had this flowing roof and this wonderful blue copper roof, and it was just an amazing design that just said this flow that looked like water, and it gave us this sense of connection with the environment. And I said we need to bring him to Japan to see where this concept came from, just to get into the pools. And so we invited Greg, and he brought his beautiful wife Pip along with him, and we started what was a great collaboration, which is still evolving as time goes on now.
So we visited many different venues, both in nature and in buildings. We discussed possibilities, looked at materials, looked at aesthetics, looked at the way places worked in terms of their flow and relationships.
We wanted to do our own Australian version of that, though. We didn't just want to mimic a Japanese spa, which a lot of people thought it was going to be. Greg Burgess, his approach to architecture was very in line with my own. He introduced us to Kevin Taylor, who he had done other work with.
I think it's a very good combination with Richard and Greg and Kevin. Kevin was very good at naturally landscaping the environment. Greg's got a huge, well-known sensitivity to the Australian environment and how to blend buildings into that seamlessly. And Richard's got his own background in horticultural and environmental management. And I think those 3 groups of talents really combine to make something special.
Our design philosophy has been to work with nature rather than against it. So we've tried to minimise earthworks and clearing any existing vegetation. We've probably put in over 40,000 plants, I would say. And apart from that, there's been incredible natural regeneration. So as we put in an overstory of trees, a lot of the ground cover has come, the indigenous ground cover's come back. There's now a huge amount more birds and bird life here, and frogs have come into our wetlands, and we've had a lot of people ask us to turn down the frog tape, and they don't believe me when they say they're actually real frogs, which is always makes me laugh.
The place is a refuge for healing and relaxation and rejuvenation. So the architecture has really taken on a role as part of a conversation with the wider landscape, with people, and probably particularly with water. Water is an important thread that runs through this project, from the hidden deep aquifer, the way water's collected from the roofs of the buildings into lakes, and the way water's flowing down the gullies.
You'll find that in most of the designs there's not many straight lines, and I've enjoyed listening to builders talk about it, and how difficult it is for them, and how they've got to become Greg specialists in order to understand his pictures and his drawings, and to try and they have to really work in collaboration together to achieve what Greg's vision is.
Yeah, the buildings are set into the landscape in a way that the landscape forms spaces between the trees and the building itself, so that the building both draws space from outside into itself and projects itself out into space. So there's a sort of reciprocity happening there with the intimacy of the interior and the intimacy of the exterior, and the landscape and the buildings become complementary mediators of that quality.
The Hot Springs story is very much a story of family business. We couldn't have done it without the support of our families, our wives. Julia's done a huge creative input in the aesthetics, particularly in the early days.
Richard would come home some nights and say, I'm sort of having a bit of difficulty with maybe the form of some of the pools, and we'd sit together and I'd sort of go around maybe doing some drawings with him around, curving some areas around, and the form and the feel of certain pools.
Miyoko, my wife, has a background in flower arranging. Her mother was a teacher of the Japanese ikebana flower arranging profession. And so Miyoko comes in 3 days a week and arranges all the flowers and gets them delivered. And it makes a nice involvement with the whole family.
From the first design, we always thought we wanted to connect family. The facility was about my brother and myself, and a shared dream. We were both starting our families at the very beginning of the Hot Springs. My wife is Japanese, and she was at the heart of the inspiration.
It was really great to see Charlie and Richard start working together, because they are so different.
By our battles, we've been able to end up winning a war, in a sense, and if you call it a war, but the war of creation.
Charlie's very good at talking and lots of ideas, so he's heads up the marketing department and does a good job of that. Better at a cocktail party than I am.
Charles tends to be the one who comes in with the way out ideas, and then it's up to Richard to kind of make them into physical reality, and I have to manage the staff somewhere around the way of getting it done.
Charlie and Richard and Norm have all been very hands-on with the project, and that's made it very intense and very much a shared vision. And that shared vision, I think, has made it a very strengthening and enjoyable journey.
I grew up in New Zealand, so I wasn't totally alien to the idea of hot springs. But, you know, when I came into this project, I didn't dream, and I don't think any of us dreamed, that it would be as successful as it has been.
Yeah, the project is still young, really, even though it's been going now for 15 years.
We've only ever used about 3 to 4 acres of the property so far. We've got 42 acres to come, and there's just so many things which will be bringing people out into the environment.
So there is on our dream drawing a rather substantial stage 3, which is accommodation and a whole new reception building and a wellness centre. We've done some infrastructure towards that, but again, we haven't had enough time to go any further yet. but everything's been planned and designed and planted to take that into account.
Wamanjika, Marambipik Bunurong, Nyandep, Purupan, Akawelam. Those words are the welcome, the official welcome to country from the Bunurong people. It says, welcome to the land of the Bunurong, our beautiful home. The intent that comes behind those words is about connection to the environment. And it's the Indigenous people who are most connected to the environment. And it is something that we've tried to create here.